In this video we're going to look at data types. So for your exam you need to be able to know of some common data types. The ones that I'm going to go through today are going to be string, integer, float or real, and the character data sets. Now there's lots of different types of data that you could use, and Java has countless amounts of data types, whether they are in the form of primitive data types or when we look at wrapper classes and which are more complex data structures. But the ones that you definitely need to know are listed, and we will go through them together. So just as a quick reminder of what a Java program actually looks like, we saw this example in the last video. You can see that we declare our class because everything's an object. So we declare our class. This one's called main in this example, and everything between the curly brackets belongs to that class. So you can see here we've then got our main method, public static void main. We take in our arguments, which have come from the command line, and all we're doing is we're printing out the words hello world. So how do we actually store data? Well, data is stored in variables just like we showed in the last video, and each variable keeps track of the type of data that it's holding. So one type of data might require more storage than another. So for example, a string is quite a complex data type, and so it takes up more storage in the RAM than what a character does, for example. So one thing that we also need to know is that Java is statically typed, which means you actually need to declare what type of data you are wanting to store. So in the example below, you can see I've got a variable that's called name. I am declaring that it is the string data type, and it's going to be equal to the string T-Lund computing. And at the end of every line, we finish it off with a semicolon. So let's have a look at how some of these data types can look in a Java program. So you can see here I've got my data types file set up with our main method in. I'm not going to go over how to set that up again because I'm pretty sure with the past few examples we've been able to see how that works. So let's show off some data types. Now what I am going to do is I'm going to put comments in this to just show what type of data I am storing. Well, in case I've not gone over it yet, a comment is used by using a double forward slash, or if you're wanting it to span multiple lines, it is a forward slash and star, and then just to finish it off, you would then just do a star forward slash, and then that gives you comments over multiple lines. So let's store some variables then. So let's start off with that string example that we used before. So string name equals T-Lund computing. So that is an example that we used on that previous slide. So you can see I've got a string, it's called name, and it equals T-Lund computing, and it's got its semicolon at the end. We've got a bit of a warning here, but that's just because I've not used it. That is all that it is telling me there. So let's make an integer now. So it's an integer, so I'm going to put int. I'm going to put age, and I'm going to make it equal to 27, which is my current age of recording. So you can see there. Now there's a big difference between this, and we'll come across it just a little bit later. I'll just go over how to actually make a float or a real. So I could say float height equals, and I'll just quickly look up my height in meters because I'm not very good at there we go. So my height is 1.68 meters. Now you can see with this one, I've had to put an F at the end. Now this is just to show that it's a float. If I wanted it to be more precise, instead of using a float data type, I could use a double. And a double is more precise and it stores larger numbers as well. And I wouldn't need to use that little F there at the end either. And finally, let's do a character. So that's char, and we could put initial equals and we could put T. So let's go through these data types just to see what is actually occurring. So here we're holding a string, okay? Very, very simple. It holds our text, okay? Our integer stores any whole number, okay? And that's so we can store numbers without a fractional part. A float or a real, because in the exam it might show up as real, but in your lessons you may hear it as a float. Float or real, any number with a fractional part. Now don't worry if it's gone onto the other line, it's just because of how my text wraps. I mean, we can shrink that down so it makes that a bit bigger. There we go. And char, so that's a character, and it will hold any single ASCII character, or just any single character. Okay, now we can use these in print statements exactly like we have done in the past. So just to give you an idea, system.out.println, and we could say, here is a bit about me. My name is name. I am, and I could then put in age, years old, and then we'll just do println. Oops, I am meters tall, and my first initial is, oops, there we go. So let me just make sure that's then error free. If I click run, so you can see it's doing a little bit of thinking, and the compiler should now come out. Here's a bit about me. My name's Teelan Computing. I'm 27 years old. I'm 1.6 meters tall, and my first initial is T. So you can see there, we can use them just in print statements exactly as we've done before. We can perform mathematics on them and any other Boolean operations on them, which we'll go over in a later video. And we'll also have a look at what this character does in later videos as well. But I'm sure some of you have been able to work it out from actually looking at the output. So let's jump back to the PowerPoint and we'll just go over some additional stuff. So now I just want to talk about actually casting data, because sometimes you're going to get into the situation where you're going to have to change the data type of one variable to a different data type. This might be to perform any mathematics on it. It might even be able to store the data a bit more efficiently. There's lots of different ways that this might be used, and you need to be able to know this for your examinations as well. So in Java, what we've got to do is we've got to use what we call wrapper classes. Now, you may have noticed that all the data types apart from string were all typed in lowercase, which seemed a bit unusual. And that's because a string is not a primitive data type in the Java ecosystem, whereas an integer is, a float is, a double is, a character is, or a char. They are all primitive, so they're all lowercase. A string is a complex data type where we have an array of characters. So because it is a complex data type, we call it string with a capital S, because it's a class. It's an actual Java class that behaves like a like a primitive data type. Now you can see on this second line here, I'm actually using one of these wrapper classes here, an integer with a capital I. Now what that does is it provides us ways of manipulating data where we can't as a normal primitive class. A wrapper class takes up a lot more storage in RAM than a primitive data type does, but you have more flexibility with your data as well. So let's have a look at this example here. We've got string number equals and then 3 in speech marks. So, and then we've got int number int equals integer.parseInt number. So what we're doing here is we're taking this string here that says 3 and we are changing it from a string into an integer and storing it into this variable here. We are then printing out the result of adding those two numbers together. So I know this might sound a little bit far-fetched, or it might feel a little bit hard to get your head around, but when we do the demonstration you'll be able to see this. We might have some issues though where the user might not enter data that we actually expect. So let's use the previous example of having the number, but actually we're starting with a string that has the letter X in. Now X can't be changed into an integer because it's not a number. X is a letter. So we would get an error here and this final line wouldn't work. So we can actually fix it using an advanced technique called a try-catch block. Now we are going to go into more detail about try-catch blocks in later videos, but I'm going to give you a little whistle-stop tour now. So here's what one looks like. Pause the video and have just a look at the code and see if you can work out what's happening. I know it's difficult and I know it's quite tricky to understand. So going line by line, our first line here we've got string number equals X. And here in this try block, so you can see that it says try, we're going to try and change that X into a number and then print out that number added to itself. Now what happens is, if we run into an error, our program would crash and it will close. But what we can do here is we can try it, and if an error does show up, we can actually catch it using our catch block and our program can continue as normal. So my catch block here is looking for a number format exception, which means anything that's expecting to be a number but it's in the wrong format or is not a number at all. And it's got the little variable called E there, which I can use to get error messages that get pulled up from this block. And you can see that I've printed out that if that error occurs, you did not enter a number. Right, let's go over this because I know it's pretty tricky, so we'll go over it and we'll actually see what it looks like. So I've come back to my file here. I've just commented out the previous code that we wrote here and just tucked it away just so that it doesn't become distracting. So let's have a look at what I had there. So we said we had string number equals, and we called it 3. So first off, this is just what I want to show before we do any sort of casting. System.out.println, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to print out number plus number. What I would recommend that you do now, before you do anything else, pause the video and try and guess what the result will be. Right, let's give this a run. So a lot of people would expect this to say 6, but actually you can see it's come out as 33. Now that's because it's a string, and when we use that plus symbol with a string, it's called concatenation, and that puts two strings together. It joins those two strings. So what we want to do is we want to change that into an actual number. So let's do int number equals integer dot parse int, and we could take in number. Now this might not work because I've called so let's call it number integer, and there we go. So you can see I'm changing that number there, and if we add them together now, number integer plus number integer, and we click run, we should now get 6. There you go. Because what we've done is we've changed that string into an integer, and then when we have two integers and our plus symbol, it's no longer concatenation, it's arithmetic. So it's adding those three together and we get 6. Now let's try that next example that we had, where we had an x. Right, let's run this. Right, you can see here we've got an error now. So exception in thread main for input string x. And you can see we've got lots of other things there. And it says number format exception there. And all it's saying is x is not a number, so I don't know what to do. Let's wrap it in that try catch block, and we can actually see what happens. So we could say try, and then there we go. So we've got our try block, and now we put catch, and we put the name of our exception in the brackets. And if you don't know what exception you're looking for, then the Java API is the most helpful place for you to go. But I know it's a number format exception. And what we can say is, we can then put in system.out.println you did not enter a number. If you want to know what the actual error that comes out is, you could put system.out.println and you could do e dot, and it has a method called getMessage, and that will also work. Right, let's run this code and see what happens now. So we've still got x, so we should get you did not enter a number. There you go. You did not enter a number for input string x. Let's try a different one. Let's try 64 now and click run. And we should get 128. There we go. So you can see that's casting and using your try catch blocks as well. So just to quickly jump back, I'm going to present you with another challenge. So have a go at making a program that will ask the user to enter two numbers and then add them together to print out the result. So for example, you can see here Java saying enter a number, the user enters 2, Java enter another number, user enters 3, Java the result is 5. So see if you can do that, and I'll see you in the next video, which will be about arithmetic and Boolean operators.